So I think you need to make that process as simple as possible. I don't know if you want me to go on a tirade, but it goes right into electronic signatures. I mean, I say people buy and sell buildings with electronic signatures. You've got to offer that same convenience to your tenants.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 167. As rental property investors and landlords, we need to be aware of the changing demographics, trends, and technologies that are shaping the future of real estate investing, especially when it comes to the impact of millennials, Generation Z, and technology on our business. My guest today speaks on these topics all over the country. Linda Liberatore is the founder and CEO of Secure Pay One, a company dedicated to landlord empowerment. She's also the author of 3 best-selling books. And today, Linda's going to help us understand demographic trends, cost-effective technology solutions you can apply to your rental business, and her projections of what changes we should expect in the coming years. Linda, thanks so much for being on the show today.
I'm so honored. It's really exciting. It's fun to be with someone like you that is basically empowering your audience for what's happening and keeping up with the trends.
Yeah, well, thank you. And one way I like to empower my audience is just any chance I get to talk about demographic trends and technology trends. I jump at that chance because I think it's helpful for everyone to kind of know what's out there that can help make their business more efficient, especially when it comes to real estate investing. But before we go there, I do want to learn a little bit about you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in this business?
Sure. Thank you again, Brian. And then I'll say I have started, probably over 20 years ago, working with small real estate investors, similar to where I am today. But that's not when I started the company. That was, I'll call it more on a personal level as a job. And I was also working with technology, and I've done like years worth of technology training. I worked with a startup out of New York City. That was exciting. That was a payment and collections. Those were all kind of web-based solutions. So I was a big part of when I saw the trend switch from, some of your listeners may not remember, but the old, loaded up with a CD-ROM software compared to the web-based trends. So that was like, I'll call it really fun and exciting. And then to see how I could take that full circle and implement that for the, what I refer to as the do-it-yourself landlord. What I hear at all these conferences, there's 7 million single family and small rental properties out there. And this is like I'll call it kind of been an underserved market. It's only like the last 10 years we finally see software kind of devoted to them. So it's been really exciting. We developed our own software when we started, and that was like 10 years ago, just for the payment collection, because at the time it was just hard to even find providers for that. So it's been exciting working with this group. They're so entrepreneurial by nature, real estate investors, and love to learn, and I love to learn as well. So it's been a great ride.
Now, you talk about loading up the old CD-ROMs and loading them onto your desktop and working off of that software. Now so a lot of it's cloud-based, or if not all of it is cloud-based at this point. What are some of the other changes you've seen over the past 5, 10, 15 years that you a lot of people would not have been able to anticipate back then?
Well, I don't know. I'm going to go with my first one. I'm going to use it as more of an office thing. Is in our office, for instance, we work everything off of laptops, but we have 2 large screen monitors hooked up to every laptop. So what I would say there is I don't know enough people value what we term in technology as the real estate of their screen. So while you can be, I'll call it mobile enough to take your to take your laptop anywhere you need to be, when you're in a fixed position and you're working with, I'll call it, we're all in this multitasking environment, especially our office, but I'm assuming most landlords, what you're gaining is, triple the size of real estate in that case. In our case, we've got, I don't even know, I'm looking 27-inch screens. So two 27-inch screens. And that was actually just something I followed actually based on one of my clients who was some kind of I forget what kind of trader, but he was a trader and he literally had a wall of 27-inch screens. And I was like, oh, wow, that is so cool. He had a stand-up bar in front of this wall of all these screens because he needed to have a good pulse of what was happening. And I feel like those investors, especially as they're chasing down deals and auctions and they're using different softwares, like not enough of them realize that by adding a couple monitors, they would really increase their productivity.
It's interesting. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but you make a very good point because it seems like lately everyone is trying to get everything down to the size of their cell phone. Their iPhone. So everything is being done off an iPhone, but you only have a tiny, tiny screen.
Yep.
Expanding that real estate can really help expand just your thinking.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely does. Definitely. I mean, I would say that I feel like it's 3-1 on a productivity score for the actual team members here of what you can do. And we all talk about, like, we do a lot with, we're transferring banking information. We're transferring, like, we all kind of joke about it. Like, you just can't do it anymore on just your laptop. It's not efficient. It's not effective. You've got to have the multiple screens in order to be carefully, creating efficient and what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of removing the ability for error, reducing the abilities for errors.
Makes good sense. So I want to talk more about technology, but I do want to ground it first in just the changing demographic trends that are driving a lot of this technology to begin with. And I know that you talk about Generation Z and how that's having an effect. Can you take us there in this conversation? Like, what's your take on Generation Z? What is Generation Z? What are the different demographics that are changing things?
Yeah, you know what, Brian, I love it. I mean, I just love it because I do embrace the change and I embrace technology. And I think embracing Generation Z is really where we all need to think about. So they're defining them as born in 1995 and after. And what they're saying is the most important thing to think about, and it's hard to wrap our minds around this, but they grew up knowing nothing but technology. So they grew up in the plugged-in world. So I have my own family, my daughters, and they span between 30 and 20 years old. So it's ironic because I once kind of listening to all these different conferences, I was kind of took it back and thought, wow, yeah, there is that change, And if anybody listening has children, they know that. So for instance, with my 20-year-old, she received a cell phone, long before anybody else did. Like we couldn't, in our minds wrap it, like, why does a child need a cell phone? You know what I mean? And I imagine nowadays, I can't even imagine. I'm sure they're getting them as toddlers, but and certainly at airports and stuff, right? You see them always on some kind of tablet. So yeah, they're a different world. So they have a different set of expectations, and quite frankly, it's going to put I'll call it a burden on everyone. So the first thing that goes along with that is they have an 8-second attention span. That's what it's recorded as. Now, Brian, if you and I, I'll say truth be told, right, and all your listeners, we're all kind of down to that, right? I mean, I just heard a podcast this morning on how to unplug, how to stop looking at your phone. I don't know that stat. You might know it, of how many times we look at our phone during the day. It's just an incredible number. It's like tens of thousands.
Oh, I'm sure it's a lot.
I can't even believe, no, that can't be. So the truth is that while we're watching Generation Z, it's really the impact of technology on all of us. I think, if you and myself were to sit down and say, what did we do 10 years ago? What are we doing differently today? We can come up with a long list. But then we try to, like, I'll call it 10X that and say, this generation knows it no other way. That is their way of doing things. And so I just think it's going to have an incredible impact and is already.
Well, give us an example. Like, what are some of the impacts that is having on landlords and rental property owners?
Well, and I'm going to give you one in particular that we used just by default, but now we see the software. So by default, when we started the business, as I just kind of described to you, our screens and what we do. So we used a Google Voice, which a lot of, I know, investors use. But what I guess we used that was so unique that I didn't realize, and I guess it makes sense, right? An investor is more mobile, so they set it up to do it on the phone. Well, we set it up to do it for efficiency's sake on the computer. So a lot of people don't realize that the Google Voice can be opened in its own screen, but used as a text message to your tenants. Well, the majority of tenants, like I've seen that, I've personally witnessed the change there, that people aren't answering the phone, but I can text, 30 people and get an answer. I can, I can get into so many other softwares to go along with that comment. But in other words, I can get quicker answers. Let's just use the example, Brian, of inspections. Maybe there's a municipal inspection, a housing inspection. I have to communicate this information for my landlord to the tenant. What's the most efficient way for me to do it as a business owner and get a reply? I don't want this to be a 5-day process. I need to know, can I schedule this so there'll be no fees or fines? And, is everybody going to be home that needs to be there? So by using this text, through the computer, I can get done those, as like you said, the little mobile screen is pretty small. I couldn't efficiently run a business off of a mobile screen, So texting has become, for everybody, not just Generation Z, has become, let's say, a primary source of reminders. Meeting reminders now come via text, doctor's appointments, what else? And my haircuts come via text, because they want to visit you where they know you're going to see it most clearly, right? And your primary source.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. Does that mean in communicating with your tenants that you're primarily doing it through this Google Voice to text?
So I'm using this example of our particular business, but now let's validate that example by saying that I'm sure, in your line of work, you've heard of the Buildiums, the Appfolios, the Propertyware, Rent Managers. So all those, I'll call it 4 or 5, and there's got to be like 35, but 4 or 5, let's call it primary sources of property management software that your listeners would be using if they've got a sizable portfolio. And we could go even smaller, Cozy and others as well. They're all have added in that text feature within the last 12 months to their softwares so that you can communicate right through the software. So similar to what we were doing, but they're doing it now right in the software where you can text your, in fact, I think one of the coolest new features, if somebody's listening that has, let's say, a Buildium or Rent Manager, is you can do what I'll call a text blast, similar to how we were talking about like with a store or retail store would use with a coupon, right? But this text blast could be to every tenant in your database that would literally say, like, this is your reminder that your rent is due December 1st. and it would list the specific amount for that tenant. So it's kind of, if you know enough about technology, that's kind of a mail merge feature with the communication feature. So it's sending not just a bulk message, but a personalized bulk message. And then add double cool on top of that is when they reply, it gets logged right into their, I'll call it notes section of that particular tenant with whatever their reply was. So it gets documented, it gets blasted, it's personalized. Like that's like really definitely a feature that they should be looking at.
Yeah, I like that it's automated in such a way that it becomes part of the tenant's record and communication history. Because if you make a phone call, that's not necessarily going to be part of the documented or recorded history. But doing it the way you just described, well, now anybody can look and see, well, what was the communication with the tenant during this period?
Well, Brian, I'm just laughing because, like, if anybody here has heard you say that, our team is actually trained that if they do make a phone call, when they hang up that phone, it must be in text, a summary of that phone call, so that we have some written record of, like, it's not just my opinion of what was said during that call, that we get it in writing what you just said.
So are you saying, are you using some sort of software that takes that phone call and converts it to text?
No, that would be very cool, right? No, what I'm saying is, if I said to you, don't forget, Brian, that inspection's Friday, if for some reason I had to get you on the phone, you weren't answering me, maybe, as soon as I hang up that call, I'm going to make sure that it goes out in text so that I have some record that you can't say. You can't say later, Brian, oh, no, I'm sorry, Linda never told me that inspection was Friday, Right.
You're gonna document it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
Type it in. We're talking about Generation Z, which is basically anyone who was born since 95. So that's interesting because that would encompass just about all college students.
Yes, it's the college students. And what they're saying is, they are your demographic right now. So let's just say somebody listening has college properties, right? And they're getting out of college or they're getting their first job. So it's those right now. I mean, this is when we talk about like the impact of all this technology over the next 5 years. Just figure they're seeping into the market now. They're not the majority of your, tenant resident database, but they will be, right?
If you are thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition 5 years ago, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional healthcare insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. So what are the differences then between them and the millennials? Because the millennials came before them. You'll have to tell me what age range they would be in. But there must be some differences then between millennials and Generation Z.
Yeah, well, they're seeing the millennials. Let's put them at let's say closer to 30. So the millennials are the ones that they were the kind of the first ones, I'll say, kind of hit with the financial, I'll call it burden of the college loans. And, we saw their first impact and they came right after the crash and stuff like that. But they didn't exclusively grow up on the technology. So they had, let's call it their own personal shift, where if you kind of picture the mindset of this Generation Z, social media, some form of social media has always been part of, let's call it their early teens through today, right? So when you say, kind of go play with your friends, that we may have said, the difference between how a 30-year-old viewed that and how a 20-year-old, they're just jumping right on their social media. So it's not behavior that hasn't seeped across to even the boomers, right? I often say I have great aunts, that are in their 80s that are on social media and we all know someone like that, their grandma, the whatever. I always say, think of it this way, how our grandparents communicating with the Generation Z. It's usually via text, right? Via social media. So it's not that it's exclusive to them. It's that they've known no other. So some of the differences that I would say is when you look at one of the most recent things that I heard is that the Generation Z are looking to their brands to create like what they call these 4 A's. And it was actually an article I read, and it really kind of struck me that they're looking for some kind of alignment with their brand, they're looking for authentic, right? They're looking to create a real relationship, and they want to see that you have some kind of an advocacy. Are you adding value? These are these words, and they're kind of trying to describe that they're a little more social, not meaning like that way, a little more social justice. Maybe that's the way I'd put it. What value are you as a company? Kind of thinking of in terms of the Toms, like you said, which really grew up more. Toms I would associate more with the millennials, but we're seeing that kind of trickle down into Generation Z as well.
What are Toms? You mentioned Toms.
Oh, Toms is the shoe that those, I guess you have to have girls, Brian. I know all the shoes.
Well, my daughter's 8, so
okay, yeah. Well, you'll get there. You're not there yet. Toms is a shoe that started from kind of a social justice where it's pretty expensive, a flat shoe. But what their theme is, for every pair you buy, they donate one as well. To people that are, I'll call it less privileged. And, I think it's third world. I don't want to say exactly where they donate them. I'd have to look it up quick. And I don't want to multitask while I'm supposed to be focused.
Oh, that's okay. Well, let me ask you, because I can just hear a lot of landlords and rental property owners out there saying social justice, authenticity. What does all that have to do with renting a room or a unit to a Generation Z or a millennial? Can you tell us how we would even take that into account as rental property owners?
Well, okay, that's funny you say that, because I am definitely big on financial justice and payments. Remember, that's our job, is to collect payments. So
yeah, I want justice for us. I want them to pay their rent.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want you to mistake those words that I'm looking for you to give away any of your rent. Yeah, let me clarify that issue on a couple accounts. So I guess let's start by somebody that doesn't pay, and so this might, hopefully you'll see the alignment, how strongly I do believe in this. Like, I do not believe, we work with a lot of, and I think I need to clarify that before I go into this. We work with a lot of, I'll call it kind of B and C properties. So they might be in some, more challenging areas. And sometimes we get some college towns, as well. So we have quite a mix. But anyway, in those particular cases, they may have housing, etc. And I'll see sometimes small landlords who will come to us after they've let, maybe they thought they were leading by their heart, and they were trying to make exceptions and let people slide on things. And I guess I feel quite opposite in that particular case, that when you sign an agreement, you want to make sure that your residents are adhering to that agreement. And in that case, social justice does not apply at all. So what I say is that you want to keep track of those $30, I'll use the term co-payments, right? There's the housing portion and there's the tenant portion. And it's really important that you're establishing a behavior of payment that no matter how small it is, it's to be collected each month. So if the scenario comes up that someone can't afford it, yes, then you should be able to provide for them a list of charitable organizations in your area that deal just with that. So they deal with what I'll call a one-time financial hardship. And the way we explain that to the resident is that is not the responsibility of the landlord to step in for that payment, that you signed a legal agreement, and that those places, that's their responsibility, is to help you if you truly have a very warranted financial hardship that was unexpected. Then by all means they'll approve you, and you'll see that there's plenty of government funding for those types of programs. But that being said, if you don't get approved, then we have a budgeting issue, and that is not the landlords, and they have to proceed with, the proper legal terms of the lease. And we often use the term out of compliance with your housing agreement, because housing does expect, and when I refer to housing, I should define that to be Section 8. So when you are receiving a Section 8 payment from the government, you are expected to comply with the terms of that. And if your portion, whether it be $30, $300, whatever the tenant's portion be, they are expected to make that payment each month.
So how does that apply to the Generation Z and the things that they're looking for when it comes to rental property?
So I think that the Generation Z is looking to your social media, if you will. They're looking to what your reputation is, quote unquote, in the community. One of the things that we advocate for is that our landlords have to start thinking about using things like social media for, I'll call it their work. Let's just talk about a plain apartment building that you might buy and you rehab and you put it out there. You're used to using, I'll call it Zillow and, all those, Postlets and all those for your advertising. But you could be doing like a constant stream of marketing just by using your Facebooks, your LinkedIn, your Instagram, to be showing the before and after pictures, to become thought of as a community leader. We advocate for newsletters, that you should be doing newsletters to all your current tenants so they know what's happening in your area, becoming a source, if you will, that they look up to for the area.
That's interesting, because social media is definitely something that I don't really think about that very much, and I don't know that many management companies focus on that too heavily. What are some of the tips and things to do and not do when it comes to social media?
Well, I'm going to say that social media is, I'm going to call it a little bit of scary of a climate, right? So if you look to the big multifamilies in your area, maybe those, let's just use the example again of around colleges, around your, what I'll call your downtown area, where it's a much higher priced rent, not necessarily the ones they own, but if we look to what they're doing, they're starting to use social media, because when you talk about Generation Z, it's unfortunate or fortunate for us that they're used to using that as like kind of a help desk, right? Like you read these horror stories of where somebody had, let's say, a bad plane ride, and literally they're getting on social media. I've seen people like tell them like, "Oh, Brian, if they did that to you, you should put that on social media." I'm like, oh, wow. Like, I guess my generation wouldn't think of doing that to someone. If I wanted something corrected by the airlines, I'd write to the airlines and tell them, So it's going to be a kind of double-edged sword for us as small landlords. So like how I see it used is I have landlords that are putting the before and after pictures, and they're getting lots of attention because people just as a community love that. And so then what happens is those get shared. And so indirectly, you're marketing to future vacancies by people knowing that you're out there and you're renting it. But then the part we have to, let's say, be careful about or realize the double-edged sword is if people are going to get out there and put comments that like, well, Brian's never fixed my toilet yet. And, I hate it, right?
That's the last thing you want to see. You put all that work into doing social media, and then it just becomes a place for everyone to go and complain.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I guess I'm saying there's ways around that. When I say around that, like there's ways of building, let's say, an LLC page as opposed to doing it, your personal. We just had a speaker out last night now he's a real estate agent, but he's an investor real estate agent. And he was at one of our groups, and he actually opens up like a page for each address of a property. Now, seems like an awful lot of work, but I guess once you get them all up, right, it wouldn't be too time consuming. But he gets a lot of interaction. He goes, and what he pays attention to is the shares. And he says this is just reaching more people than I would necessarily reach that know about what I have happening with these homes. So he kind of believes that we need to get into the mindset of an always on kind of marketing, as opposed to just when I have a listing. And that you're kind of building, I'll call it your tribe or your following. But by building pages, it's a little bit, you have the ability to like turn off comments and not to allow, and I'm not sure that that's the way to go, Brian, because
Yeah, well, when it comes to millennials and Generation Z, and social media and just the thought process that each group goes through when they are researching where to live and trying to decide between different units that might be available. Can you take us through that thought process? I mean, obviously social media is part of it. What else is part of it?
Well, one of the things I refer to is reducing all friction from the process. Like we have to start to think in terms of, and I always, if I'm in front of a group, I always get a laugh when we talk about, when's the last time you saw a fax machine, right? And we never thought, I guess, again, I'm a little bit older. Who thought, right, that at this point nobody really is communicating via fax? Well, I kind of feel like that's what we're going to see happening with the when you send somebody an application and you say, print this, fill it out, scan it, return it to me. Like for some people, that's like saying, can you run around this parking lot 25 times, like that. Those are insurmountable, like mountains, right?
They're just not going to do it.
Yeah, they might not have a printer. They certainly might not have a scanner, right? So what's become, like used to be easy is not so easy anymore, even for people. So it's like, and I remember this, like I'll call it, 6 years ago, explaining to somebody, just take a picture with your cell phone. That will be okay. I can use that. You know what I mean? Like if they didn't have a scanner, I'd say, just fill it out and take a picture and send that to me and we'll take it that way, but now, what we're saying is you're going to have to, you don't have to, but you should look at some kind of online application form that, whether you want to build it yourself, depending on how small you are, you could do a Google form, and I see them every day used, and they're for free. Or you can use, these softwares like I think we mentioned Cozy or like Hemlane. They'll let you fill out the application process online, and they have a pretty low, inexpensive fee. But certainly, again, if we look at the bigger leaders in that industry, the buildiums, the rent managers, they're going with online applications that leads right into the online screening, and it's all kind of click, 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 and you've got that application. And from a landlord's perspective, and again, I'm a small business owner, so I think in terms of dollars and cents, they're doing your data entry for you. So if you get that paper back and then you have to re-enter everything in your software or your spreadsheet or however you're organizing your management files, let them do it, let them enter it accurately. And then screen immediately. And I was even talking to somebody, even from the fair housing perspective of if they don't fill it out, it shows right up on the software, like incomplete application. Well, there you go. You don't have to worry about somebody checking on you. Did you not, why didn't you, approve this person? Well, they never filled out the application completely. Take a look at my software. So I think you need to make that process as simple as possible. And that goes, I don't know if you want me to go on a tirade, but it goes right into electronic signatures. I mean, I say people buy and sell buildings with electronic signatures. You've got to offer that same convenience to your tenants. They've got to be able to fill out a renewal, whatever form that you're looking for them to do, whether it's an application, renewal. They need to be able to do an e-signature as opposed to that print sign, scan, return.
Makes sense. What are some of the other friction points that your potential renter might encounter, and technologies that can help you get past those friction points?
Well, a couple more we like. I'll give you some. I'll call it. These are maybe not for everybody, but we think they save a ton of time. Is those inspections we were talking about. So if they do have Section 8 tenants, we are a really big proponent of getting that put into a calendar. So we start by making sure there's a calendar that goes out to your maintenance man, your tenant, and yourself, of course. And we add 3 reminder dates to it. So you're getting, like, I'll call it a 10-day before, a 3-day before, and up to you on the last one. Do you want it morning of, or do you want it the day before as the final reminder? Those of you that do accept Section 8, you know that there's an abatement to follow if you miss that inspection. So you want everybody on the same target date, right? If there's any repair work to be done, hopefully that 10-day early will make sure that you've completed any last minute things, keeps the tenant on board. And we always use the term, please be sure somebody 18 or older is there. So we kind of try to deflect that whole, I can't be home. We just put it on them to be sure somebody is there. Pets are secured, that kind of thing. Try to do some proactive things in that calendar. And then we, along with that, and we kind of make a joke here amongst our team that we DocuSign everything. I always say I'll DocuSign my mother if I could. So then we send it to them via DocuSign so that there's no, and we're just looking for initials, but we send them a notice via DocuSign on increases, on renewals. It's just taken a lot of the friction. You've probably somehow heard the rumors of the Chicago landlord-tenant ordinances, and they're very burdensome on the landlords. So I don't know about you guys, but we're up to 35 pages on a lease with disclosures of everything that needs to be given between the lead-free and, all the radon and all the different disclosures. So going with an electronic signature on those is just incredible. I mean, it literally has been a game changer for us from the renewal perspective. Any of your landlords that have done this any length of time knows what I'm saying. You mail it in the mail, you call them 3 times, you email them 3 times, and now you're almost at the renewal date and you still can't get the document back, And so you do it via some type of, and I'm using the term DocuSign, which of course is the brand name, but any type of e-signature, whatever brand they select, or whatever provider they select is fine. But the point is, people are, again, it's that mentality. I think that's seeped in, that 8 seconds or less. Give it to me via my cell phone. They open it, they click, click, click. They probably haven't read a thing about what's in there, but they've signed off on it.
What about marketing your unit to this? Whether it be to Generation Z or millennials or anybody. What are some of the friction points when it comes to actually getting someone to come and see your unit or look at it online and make a decision?
Well, I think, and this is just, I'll call it the way of the world. I don't know that it's my necessarily big secret, but I think that since so much is going on web-based, I think a small landlord needs to devote more attention to the quality of the pictures. In the past, the focus wasn't so much on viewing things online first. I think we're getting through a better percentage of decisions, or you're losing. Can I say that in the right way? Do you see what I'm saying? I think they're getting further in their decision-making process by web than they once did. So maybe before they just opened up 4 and then they went and looked at all 4. I think some people are getting left out of that decision-making drill down process where it might be going from 10 to 4 by just not spending a little bit more money about putting up some nicer pictures, better quality. One of the men that we work with, a landlord, he actually does that that virtual staging even. And again, this so much depends upon the price point of your homes, of what kind of money you want to put into it. But with the virtual staging, if there was no furniture in there, it adds the furniture in the picture.
So you can take a photo of an empty room and then just plop in some furniture.
Yeah, well, they charge
artwork.
you, of course. They charge you, of course. It isn't free. And you do, and it does have to be in there with a disclaimer that it's a virtual. And here's the one I always say, I don't suggest you put in built-in bookcases in your virtual. Let's keep it simple there. But I think the quality of that image, we often say, like, you'd often be surprised to look through like a Craigslist, a local school. That school that I was talking about, those thank you videos that they've made are incredible. Those kids are learning all that in school. Like it's something that I wish I had that talent. I probably never had that talent anyway, that eye for that. But then now they just have the tools, zip, 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 and they're able to put, so that's kind of that same, I'll call it, quality they're looking for. One of my daughters helped us with marketing last year, and one of the things she did that I just was really unbelievable, and it was so simple, is there's a free software out there, and I can't think of the name. I think it's called Magisto. And she took, like, I'll call it 10 pictures that we took from a conference, and it literally puts them to music. It flashes them on the screen for 2 seconds each. And it was just like, I'll call it a memory of the event. But you can imagine like what that does with like just 10 pictures of your house. It just makes it stand out a little bit when it's posted on social media. What else do you use? Like your Zillows, all your outlets that you're using anyway. It just makes it a little different. It's not vanilla like the rest of the listings,
What do you think of the 3D tours?
Well, we were talking about that. Actually, that came up last night at one of our meetings. You have to be careful for defects in the home. Make sure all your defects are fixed prior to doing a 3D tour. I think it's a little bit of effort, but I think it's a big payoff. But what they were saying is people really, especially people buying a higher priced home, they're going to like 3D it, like they're going to go on that tour multiple times. So if there is a cabinet door that's, looks a little bit broken, they're going to for sure see it after they continue to walk through it over and over and over again. So yeah, make sure everything's done before. But I do think they're nice. But again, it's a financial investment, so I don't like to spend other people's money, but I do think they're nice.
I'm curious, we started the conversation by just talking about changes that you've seen over the past, 5 to 20 years in technology. When you look out into the future and how technology will be changing what we do even more when it comes to real estate investing, what do you see?
I think I'd focus on friction points. Like one that let's first talk about, to go with that, what do I see is I try to, let's put it this way. I'm just one person, right? So I try to look what others are seeing that are bigger than me, right? So like, for instance, in Chicago area, we have what's called the Chicagoland Apartment Association, and they're part of the National Apartment Association. So I'm sure in your Michigan area, there's, now they're for the, they represent, if you will, the very large multifamilies in the city of Chicago. But by just perusing their newsletters, I see things like they're talking about, again, I'm not the genius, they're talking about these smaller living spaces, more community spaces, that the community amenities that were once, you have to have a pool, you have to have this, you have to have that. They're looking more for these social gathering spots. I was with somebody that was talking about these large luxury homes where they're kind of like the Airbnb, but they're making it a home/office for people that travel like internationally. So they can, stay overnight and have their office in the same one room of this large, so I see a lot of the shared economy, like I'll call it rippling down. I'm not a big proponent of like the small single family guy necessarily going into all the Airbnbs, But I think we see the impact what's going to have, like, let's say with cars, with, what's going to happen with these, let's say, garage spaces that, how is that going to get converted to more, living space, lifestyle space. I definitely think we're in the time of the experience coming. Like, what's the experience like? I think if you just ask yourself that question, like, how easy is your experience for you to market and attract these new tenants? Because remember, we're not just, while we're focused on Generation Z, it applies to everybody that's applying to you. From my age, from a baby boomer through, the millennials, through the Generation Zs, we're all impacted by this. Like, from a banking perspective, here's an example when we say banking that, okay, I can't predict that one. That's really a tough one. What I can tell you is within the last 11 months, we have seen the quick pay grow by 400% in our company. 400%. I mean, we had to do the stats because we were like, we thought it was increased a lot, but it was like these were all people that once we said, yeah, you could quick pay us, like I didn't even realize how many of these smaller banks were offering a similar service that could come across.
Explain to our listeners who aren't familiar, what is quick pay?
So it's really, I should have told you at the beginning, I used to work for a bank for years, so I'm very familiar with the ACH process, and that's how we started as a company in the Federal Reserve. That goes through the Federal Reserve just like a check would, right? You write a paper check, it goes through the Federal Reserve, it goes to Brian's bank, it takes the money out of his account, comes back through the Federal Reserve, and comes to my bank. Well, Chase has found a way to, like, I'll call it, circumvent that process so that it's not a 3-day, but that basically the ACH process is EFT, ACH. They use those terms interchangeably, but that's, like, I'll call it a 3-day, 2 business days, and on the 3rd business day, you used to find out if it was sufficient funds or not. Well, so what Chase QuickPay is doing is allowing you to take it right out of your account as the consumer and pay your landlord directly as long as the landlord sets up a Chase account. Now, what's really nice about that is these other smaller banks, they're called Zelle providers, Zelle. They're allowing their users, if you will, to also pay you. So all you're having to provide them is an email, and then you open up, let's say, your Chase online account, and you'll get a confirmation number that validates that email that the money was put in your account. So it's I think it's a very important method of offering that as an additional tool. So we were talking about kind of trends. That's a tough one to predict because, I know that people will say blockchain and this, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with payments. All I can tell you is my ACH is feeling kind of archaic right now.
It's going the way of the fax machine.
Yeah. And that was like 8 years ago, I couldn't give you you didn't want to give me your bank account. You were like, oh, I can't share that, and nowadays people will just like email it to us and we're like, hey, wait. We don't really want you to share it that easily. I'm like, we don't want your number on our line. But yeah. And when you talk about the credit checks, I don't know what's going to happen with that. That's another very unpredictable area because there's so many, like I'll call it legislation that's coming down against it. And that kind of scares me from the landlord's perspective. They're not wanting evictions to show, they're not wanting criminal behavior to show, because they're saying that's unfair they use the example of the person that once was picked up on, let's say drug charges and they're clean and it was just a silly thing. But we all know that that's not the tenant we're worried about. There's much more different, and how do we handle that as landlords when I have, let's say, a multifamily building, So I don't know what the legislation is going to do with that. But I don't know, how does credit scores and all that impact our future and criminal histories and what's going to happen with that. I just think that, I'm very big on speaking about, artificial intelligence. I guess that's one thing I'd say to your landlords is if you're accumulating any size of a portfolio, you need to realize the data, just the way Uber has data on who's moving back and forth at specific times of the day. You have so much data about your tenants. And if you would make it a better practice of using these softwares or whatever your own little system is, of recording every repair, every serial number, keep yourself a good solid database of your properties. And it's, I think, amazing in what a short amount of time how you'll be able to identify trends. Is it silly example I'll give is is it time to replace that roof as opposed to continue to send somebody out for the leak? So that's not the best example, but my point being that if you're recording things, it's not just, I have a piece of paper here, I have a spreadsheet there. Once you use some type of property management database to keep track of it, it will help you make better business decisions and be more predictive in your nature. As AI, remember, is just an artificial intelligence. It's taking that data, and there's so many forms of it, but right, and it's predicting, what's going to happen next, and it's helping with these communications where, that we can call places, and I always say it knows my shoe preferences before I do anymore, right? I don't have to search so many pages because it's going, hey, how about these? You looked at these last week,
Mm-hmm.
So I think you need to at least get in that mindset as a landlord that you know a lot about your area. You know a lot about what people could be experiencing in your area. And I know, again, you're not, on, let's say, in these A-class properties, but you still have, let's just say the little coffee shops, what's the experience in your area? Is it the quiet experience you're selling, or is it, are you on a busy street and are you selling the mobility of them being able to use a public transportation or close to an airport? Kind of think in terms of what experience are you selling when you have a unit for rent.
Linda, how would our listeners get a hold of you if they wanted to learn more about your business or get more information from you?
Sure. They can email me, would probably be the most direct, or call me. I'll start with an email as Linda and then the initial L, and then it's at, and it's SecurePay1 spelled out, SecurePayone.com. Or they can call my mobile phone, that's 847-436-9006. I'm on LinkedIn, all the social media sites. I'd love to help them answer a question if they're looking to make changes.
Great. And any final thoughts or words of wisdom for our listeners?
Well, we talked about things to follow. I would say look up to your big multifamilies, look to what they're doing because that trickles down to us as the smaller landlords. Look for, I'd say look for the buildiums and the rent managers and the Appfolios. Remember, they have much deeper pockets than you do, and they're watching these trends closely so they stay relevant. So they're posting lots of, Buildium just put out, a whole report on the 2018 renter and what they were about. Study that stuff. It will help you.
Linda, this has been a really interesting and fascinating conversation. I mean, just helping us understand the different demographic trends and what that means to our business and how to reduce those friction points and the technology that can help make things more efficient. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful. I hope I could help.
This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB & Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.